Now I'm going to skip to the little old lady part. What happened, I was on my way to have lunch with Molly, and I was halfway to the restaurant when I saw this little old Mayan lady, maybe 4 feet tall, soaking wet, all bent and stooped over and bow-legged, struggling to carry 2 big baskets full of what must have been bricks for all the trouble she was having with them. She kept stopping to readjust her burden and stagger a few more steps. I looked at her for a moment, thinking I really ought to help her, but I'll be late, and then it hit me. How great it would be if I was late because I just had to stop and help some little old lady with her baskets. What a saint I'd seen to Molly. I immediately felt terrible about it, thought about what a self-centered prick I was, and started to walk again, keeping one eye on the little old lady. She was hobbling down the long colonnade on the south side of Central Park, and all I had to do was take 2 more steps for her to be out of my sight and out of my life forever. Then, hating myself for even considering ignoring her, I ran down the colonnade to help the unsteady woman. And for the record, I mostly did it because it was the right thing to do. "Señora," I said when I got to her side. "Un momento." She looked up at me with a very clear and cynical expression on her wizened face. I held out my hands and, not knowing how to say it in Spanish, asked her in English where she thought she was going with my baskets. "Como?" I thought for a moment, and then just shrugged and took the baskets from her, asking, "A dónde vamos?" "Ah," she said, without wasting any time acting surprised or grateful. "Gracias." She waved me forward and started hobbling on, and I followed her. She tried a few times to engage me in conversation, but even if my Spanish was good, I'll never be able to follow her dialect. "Lo siento, no hablo español muy bien," I told her. I was getting pretty good at saying that, what with all the practice. She nodded, like she'd expected as much. "No estoy muy sorprendida, Canchito." Then she garbled a bunch of gibberish at me to pass the time until we reached the end of the colonnade. We had to wait a moment to let a horse and carriage go slowly by. The driver was a young Mayan fellow who stared at the 2 of us as he passed by, then nodded and gave me a thumbs up. Maybe this means I've watched too many movies, but I thought for a second that one day there would be a robbery, a bunch of guys with masks and guns, and one of them would be threatening me and demanding I hand over my money or he'd shoot me in the face, and this one robber would recognize me and go, "Hey, not him. Let that one go." In Spanish, of course. And I would look at him and I'd recognize his eyes looking at me over the bandana he had on, covering the rest of his face. Or maybe I'd be in a fight with Toto and get a good lick in that makes that son of a bitch realize he's gonna lose, and he pulls one of his guns out of thin air and sticks it in my face, and this guy would just happen to be there with 12 of his buddies, and they'd all pull sawed-off shotguns out of their wherever little Mayan dudes hide their sawed-off shotguns. Then I thought, yeah, I definitely seen too many movies. After he passed, there were a few cars that were spaced far enough apart that we could have crossed, but she seemed to be a little cautious. I felt bad again for being impatient because she was still bent over and bow-legged and probably had a good reason for not darting across the street. We finally made it across the cobblestones, back onto the sidewalk. Damnedest thing, there was a really cute girl standing there watching us. Ceci, the suicide blonde Antiguena, who worked with Molly at Riley's, with a big old grin splitting her face and showing me all her perfect white teeth. "So, what are you, she asked when we got near to her. "How do you say, good Samaritan?" I smiled and shrugged. I have my moments. "Ah, okay, you knock yourself out." Perfect, I thought when we moved on at a snail's pace. She works with Molly, sees her every day, and she'll tell her all about me being such a nice guy. I couldn't pay for better publicity than that. Asshole, I thought immediately afterwards. You don't do this because someone might see you. You do it because it's the right thing to do. But that selfish little voice in my head kept suggesting my karma would improve, if there was such a thing, or God would smile down upon me, again, and that if I could go ahead and count my chickens, all the blessings that would rain down upon me for doing this one act of kindness. And goddamn, we are going a long way. Christ! I looked back at the colonnade several blocks away and couldn't believe how long it had taken us to get that far, and wondered how much farther we'd have to go. The baskets were getting heavy, and I scolded myself for thinking that, because I was one hell of a lot stronger than this little old lady, and she was going to make the trip all on her own without bitching about it. Probably made it by herself every day since forever, and would tomorrow and every day until she died, carry these baskets full of bricks, it seemed, back and forth across Antigua. I wondered what the hell she thought about that. Had she even bothered to dream about becoming a princess when she was younger, or did she already know that she was going to carry heavy shit all over creation for her entire life? And was she resigned to it? And did she ever even think there was an option? Was there an option at all? And where the was her house? Christ almighty. We had walked all the way to First Avenue and a bit past it, over a bridge into the forest that started across the easternmost street and sloped up the side of the mountain. She finally turned and said, "Muchas gracias, joven," gave me a little bow and took the baskets from me. I asked her if she was sure, and she nodded, turned away and hobbled toward the forest. I watched her go and looked at my watch. Shit! I turned and ran back the way I'd come. A couple of times I ran across the street without looking and had to jump when I heard the screech of tires, feeling metal graze the fabric of my jeans and knowing I'd just barely missed being crippled. But I kept running, thinking, damn, I must like this girl if I care that much about not wanting to keep her waiting. I felt the wind messing up the hair I'd gone to all the trouble of making perfect. I felt the heat of the sun and the exertion making my inner thighs start to sweat, and knew I'd need another shower before I'd be comfortable taking my jeans off in someone else's company. And then, because I was already unclean, I went ahead and busted some parkour moves as I ran, every time I had to dodge something, or someone, vaulting over this and that, making a fool of myself, until I heard someone shout my name and I skidded to a stop. Molly was standing on the other side of the street, in her tank top and faux hawk, with her big happy smile. "In a hurry somewhere?" "Yeah, I got this really hot date and..." All of a sudden my breath gave out on me and my wind left, and I was soaked in sweat, having to lean on a cyclopean wall behind me while Molly laughed. "It looks like every cigarette you've ever smoked is coming back to haunt you." I wheezed at her and shook my head, grinning at how dumb I must have looked. "Well, you can relax, honey. I'm running late too, as you may have noticed." I started to say something clever, but I doubled over and had to put my hands on my knees instead. There was a voice I was hearing in my head, some young guy with an Australian accent I'd heard somewhere before saying, "I gotta tell you, I've looked better." And I had to smile, shaking my head at myself. So that was the start of it. The second time I saw the little old lady, I was on my way home from work. I'd gotten a job since then, teaching English, and I was going in that direction anyway, so I said, "Hola, ¿a dónde vamos?" and took the baskets. Some people smiled at me as we passed. The third time, I was in a hurry to work, and I saw her on the sidewalk up ahead. I thought to myself, fuck, not now, and crossed the street so that I could hurry past without seeing her see me, or at least pretend I hadn't seen her if she had noticed me. Again, I was ashamed of myself, and I turned back around. Cursing myself because I knew I'd be late, I walked back to where she was readjusting her burden and stuck out my hands. She looked up and almost smiled. Almost, but not quite. Just gave me a little nod and handed the baskets over. That time we went the other way, all the way across town, once again, but this time from Central Park to the market. We passed some young women who applauded from the window of the restaurants they worked in. The fourth time, no one smiled at me, clapped, gave me a thumbs up, none of that. I was disappointed, and even more disappointed in myself that I felt that way, and decided never to go out of my way to help anyone again, especially that little old lady, because if I was just doing it for attention or karma or God's favor, then it wasn't worth anything, and I was probably bad for my soul anyway. So I never did it again, ever. Until the next week, when I saw her again. And it occurred to me that she didn't give a shit why I helped her. She was just glad that I did. And I thought, as I was taking her baskets again, man, this woman just lives to make me late, doesn't she? One of the nights that I was at Riley's, this pretty Guatemalan girl came up to me and said, in the Queen's English, "I saw you the other day out on the street. You were helping an old woman with her baskets. You're a good man. I'm Anna. What's your name?" And that worked out pretty well for me. It got me thinking. The process of picking up a girl begins a long time before the pickup line. First, be friendly to everyone you see and always be ready with a warm smile. That way, you'll still have laid the foundation in everyone's mind that you're worth knowing. Every time I saw someone pushing a stalled car down the street trying to start it, from that moment on, I dropped whatever I was doing to lend a hand. That crippled guy who's always trying to take photos for tourists by the fountain in the park, Edwin, I carry him across the street and help him to Doña Luisa, a block and a half away. I buy chuchitos from the lady who sits on the corner every night, hoping someone will buy them. I buy all of them and leave them next to whoever I see sleeping on the ground outside of the Mooney. I admit that I keep an eye out for hot chicks while I'm doing it, hoping they'll see me, but I don't think the people I help give a damn why I do it. They're just happy I do it. So, I say, instead of practicing pickup lines and palmistry, make an effort to be a better man. Maybe the girl you'll want to meet later may have seen someone you were nice to before. Or maybe it'll be a friend of hers who will vouch for you that you're a decent guy. And who knows? Maybe you will have become one.